The Space Engineers 2 Drive, Automate and Detonate update is here. If you're watching this on the day this video comes out, the update will be releasing tomorrow, July the 6th at 5 PM UTC, alongside a live stream that will be celebrating the release of the update. And if you're watching in the future, this update is available right now. So without further ado, let's take a look at everything in this update. To start with, Drive. As you can see, there are 6 different size variants for wheels. The 1 meter, the 1.5 meter, the 2.5 meter, the 5 meter, the 7.5 meter, and finally, the largest, the 12.5 meter. One of the big concerns we had about wheels in Space Engineers 2 is that due to how bumpy the terrain is in Space Engineers 2, that perhaps the wheels will not be man enough to navigate it. But as you can see here, this rover is effortlessly driving over this terrain with basically no issues. And it's going to go straight up the grass here, and look at that, straight over. From initially messing around with them, the wheels feel a lot more stable than Space Engineers 1, and additionally much more capable. Ow. And as with Space Engineers 1, the wheels have a bunch of settings that you can tweak in order to change how they function. So if you want them to go faster, you can change the acceleration here. Stiffness is how strong the suspension is. And damping should affect the way the wheels absorb impacts. Now there is currently less options for wheels as there was in Space Engineers 1, but I would expect more options to be added in the future. And additionally, what's interesting is unlike Space Engineers 1, there's no left or right wheels, and the game has some way of automatically calculating which wheels need to turn which direction, and also which ones need to turn and which ones don't, as you can see only my front wheels is turning. I haven't experimented with that too much yet, so I don't know exactly how that works, but it's very interesting nonetheless. Alongside the new wheel blocks, we also have the hinge, which completes the sets of mechanical blocks in Space Engineers 2, with the piston and the rotor being added in the last update. So all those players that have been waiting for all the mechanical blocks to be added to Space Engineers 2, they're now all in. Additionally, in the last update, when pistons and rotors were added, there wasn't an option to set angle limits on the rotor, but with the addition of the hinge, all 3 of those blocks now have the options for limits, making them much easier to tune to what you need them to do. Moving on to Automate, there are several new Automate blocks in Space Engineers 2, starting with the event controller. The event controller was added recently to Space Engineers 1 in the Automatons update, and it's basically a if this then that block. If storage is full, turn on light. If someone closes the door, pressurize the room, etc, etc. Due to the unified grid system in Space Engineers 2, which allows all blocks to be placed on the same grid, there is only one size of event controller in Space Engineers 2, being only this small block that you can see here. However, being a small block doesn't mean it hasn't received a big upgrade in Space Engineers 2, with it having a lot more options to detect compared to its Space Engineers 1 counterpart. We've been shown demonstrations of the event controller in the past, using them to control a mechanical arm, something that wasn't possible for the event controller to do in Space Engineers 1, and we've also shown the event controller being used to set up automatically braking and reversing lights, again something that wasn't possible in Space Engineers 1. On screen here, highlighted in green and yellow, are the new events that have been added to Space Engineers 2, and I'm sure many more will be added in the future. If you want a more in-depth look at the event controller's features, Dread Mechanic and Engineered Coffee have both released preview videos covering the event controller, so check out those videos after this one if you're interested. And if you want to deep dive into any of the other features coming in this update, I will link the rest of the previews on this update that other YouTubers have done in the pinned comment below this video. The timer is very self-explanatory. You can set a time at the bottom, so for example if you set this to 5 seconds, and then after 5 seconds it will then trigger an action based on whatever you put in the bottom here. So if we grab a light, a nice light up here, we find our light on the left hand side and then click and drag onto the hotbar. Then we can set an action, so let us toggle whether the light is enabled or disabled. Press save, and you can see that puts the first slot in, but I also have the 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, blah blah blah, whatever. And then additionally, I can toggle between hotbars. So I have the option to trigger up to 90 things on this timer, and that is the same for any automation block in Space Engineers 2. What I'm also going to do is I'm going to drag the timer, put it in slot number 2, and I'm going to set the timer to start as well on the action. So what this should do is toggle the light, and then it should start the timer for 5 seconds again. So if I start it now, you can see after a couple of seconds, maybe 5 was slightly too long, it toggles the light off and it started the timer again. So in a couple of seconds, it will toggle the light back on. Ta-da! Simple stuff. And if you don't want that little click sound you heard there when the light toggles, you can turn it onto silent mode and it will just turn the light on and off without any sound whatsoever. This update also adds the sensor, which you can see here. And like the timer, the sensor is self-explanatory. If I walk close to it, you can see that it's triggered this red light up here. And additionally, this sound block over here, which has also been added in this update. And you can see I moved away from the sensor and the sound block is turned off and the light is turned off as well. If I come to the terminal of the sensor, you can see that I've got my option to turn the light on and my sound block at the bottom here. And one thing that's incredibly useful in Space Engineers 2 is that you can show the radius down here. You could do this in Space Engineers 1, but it required you to do a bunch of different settings to actually get it to come up. But in Space Engineers 2, it's just a single button. And I can increase my radius here. So if I increase the front, you can see the box is now bigger. And if I now move into this little box here, again, you can see my light has come on and my sound starts playing. And you can also configure what is detected. So grids, floating objects, which is like items dropped on the ground, players, terrain, and then whether the detected entity is the owner, an enemy, or a friend. As already shown, the sound block has been added to this update. And if you go to the terminal, you can see it has a bunch of sounds that it can play, along with an option for volume, to loop, how long the time between the loops is, and also whether or not it's random, which allows you to select multiple sounds. So if I add all of the button sounds up here to the list, you can see that my selected sounds list now includes all of the button sounds. And then if we come back, we can demo another new feature in this update, the fact that buttons now have functionality. So I come to my button panel, you can see that I have my 4 buttons at the bottom, find my sound block and drag it onto the bar, select play as my option. Now if I press my button, you can hear that it plays a variety of different button sound effects. All good stuff. Whilst I talk about returning features from Space Engineers 1, let's talk about groups. As you can see here, under Beachcomber, I have a group for wheels, which contains all of my wheels. And then by clicking the group, I can select all of my wheels and make changes to them. So if I wanted to set them to maximum acceleration, I can. You can see I also have one for lights, but I'm going to delete that. You can see my lights are no longer grouped. Now if I go back to them and select both by pressing Shift, I have the option to create a group at the top, which then creates a group called Block Group 2, which I can then double click to rename back to lights. And then by clicking lights, I can change the color. So currently you can see I've got this halogen color, but I can now change them both to bright pink. Isn't that lovely? Additionally, if I go to my cockpit toolbar, you are able to drag groups onto the hotbar. So if I drag lights onto 4, for example, and use it to set light color to blue, shall we? And now, if I press 4, you can see my lights change to blue. Not very practical, but you know, someone might want to. And if you don't want to get into a cockpit to do changes, you can place down a control panel, which due to the power of Space Engineers 2 and the unified grid system, you can place pretty much anywhere you want on your ship. Much more convenient than the Space Engineers 1, where you'd have to take up an entire 2.5 meter by 2.5 meter by 2.5 meter block space for a single control panel. But if I interact with it, I can now configure my entire rover from here, meaning I can do it from outside of the cockpit if I need to. And the final block to mention as part of automation is the LCDs, which you can see there is a variety of different sizes of. By interacting with the LCD, you can configure the content on it. By default, it's none, but if I turn it on, you can see that I've got the option to edit text at the top, the option to load images down here, options for background color, text color, font, and a whole bunch of other things. So if I edit text and put in the favorite words like and subscribe, scroll right down to make my font nice and big, put it in the center, and let's make the background a nice, beautiful red. And voila, a large curious message on my LCD. And if I go to a different one, as I said, there is the option to add images. So if I go to warning, scroll down, add to selection, you can see there is a warning sign on it. And you can do a whole bunch of other things. For example, turn off the aspect ratio to make it stretch, rotate it to the side, change the padding so there is more of a border around the image, and a whole bunch more. If you add in AWB suit, you now have 2 images in our selected images. And like our timer, we can toggle how quickly it changes between them, which it defaults to 5 seconds. So we have our warning sign, and then after a couple seconds, we have our AWB suit. And it's also worth noting that this also affects LCDs in your cockpits, so you can edit all of the displays in there as well. And additionally, you can automate what's on these LCDs using all of the blocks that we looked at earlier in this section. So we've looked at drive, we've looked at automate, let's go to space and look at our third thing, detonate. So the first of our new detonate blocks is the warhead, which has a lot more going on than just exploding. So if we start with the small warhead, if I place down a control panel in front of it and find our warhead in the list, if I press arm on the warhead over here, watch what the warhead does. It opens up. That's actually super cool that it does that. I love little interactive elements on blocks like this. And if you come back to our control panel, we can set the detonation time to 5 seconds and start countdown and take a little step back. And then, boom. And you can see that the warhead generates a considerably large explosion. And if you come to the large warhead and do the same, if we arm the warhead, you can see that this middle bit opens up and it does my favorite thing. It starts spinning. Ooh. Once again, if we arm it, we'll give it a 5-second cooldown and walk a step back, probably a bit further. And boom. That's a big explosion. And as you can see, it has separated this section of the base off. However, there is more to warheads than just destruction. As you can see, there is a brand new feature in Space Engineers 2, scorch marks. And hot damn, does this look amazing. They do seem to fade out quite quickly, probably for performance reasons, but it does add so much to the visual impact of explosions. Not only do you get the damage, not only do you get the fracturing blocks in Space Engineers 2, you also get a physical scorch of where the explosion has impacted. Destruction in Space Engineers 2 just gets better and better. Warheads aren't the only explosive blocks added in this update though, as hydrogen tanks now explode. And just for context, this gun is a debug gun. It says the word debug on the side. The normal rifle does not do that much damage. And also active reactors also explode when they're damaged. So if I press this button here to turn this one off, you can see the inside will slowly stop spinning. And now if I shoot it, it will just get damaged and then break apart like a normal block. But this reactor is on and active, so if I shoot it, you can see that it explodes and leaves a lovely scorch mark around the edge. Additionally, containers with ammo in them also explode, so you can see that there is 478 Gatling ammo in this box, and there is 0 in this box. So if I shoot this box, you can see that it just gets damaged and flies away. But if I shoot this box, it explodes and also weirdly drops the ammo on the ground. I have tested, and it appears regardless of how much ammo is in the container still explodes at the same size. But the developers have said they're going to continue tweaking all of these explosive values in the future. But the main thing now is reactors, tanks, and containers with ammo in them are now explosive, so you'll now have to engineer your ships in a way to keep these blocks protected. Alongside the warheads, we've also got the rocket turrets and the static rocket launchers. As you can imagine, rockets do a large amount of explosion damage and also scorch marks, and are just generally very fun to mess around with. Oh, just look how good the scorch marks look, guys. You can't tell me this doesn't look cool. And on top of the addition of the rocket turret, both the rocket turret and the regular turret now have the option to be manually controlled. And apparently they don't start reloaded, so every time I have to shoot one, they have to reload. But, boom, gone. Bye-bye. Do you know, I think I could just sit and shoot rockets at ships all day. I need to stop getting distracted. Oh, the little guy looks so cute. He looks like the little binoculars guy in Toy Story 1. And on top of manually controllable weapons, we also have aim down sights for the hand weapons. Both the debug gun, the rifle, and the rocket launcher. And once again, as a demo, look, scorch marks. Whilst the update is called Drive, Automate, and Detonate, there is a lot more to this update than just those 3 things. There's been a massive overhaul to contracts and colonization in this update. Here I am on Velation Station, and if I go to the contract terminal, you can see there is a whole bunch of contracts, whereas previously they were quite linear in the way they wanted you to do them. So if I accept one of them, and then once completing it, come back and claim the reward, you can see that my sector progress has gone up by 20%, but there is no reward for sector progress on any of these contracts. That's because as you complete contracts, the sector progress now goes up by default, and rather than just being a linear stage of the sector being not colonized and colonized, there is now multiple stages of colonization for each sector. You can see that the current sector, the Vergis sector, is currently explored, and if you go to my map, you can see we have the Vergis sector down here, and again it says current stage explored, and next staged settled. And if you come over to Chemic, the current stage is unexplored, and the next stage is explored. And once you've completed enough contracts, and you can see my sector progress is 80% on the right hand side, we unlock a special contract type, Station Upgrade, which has this little symbol over here to indicate sector progress. So if we accept this contract, and then when it's completed come back onto our terminal, and then claim, you can see we get this, a cutscene indicating that our sector stage has increased to settled. And now if we come back to our terminal, you can see that our current sector stage is settled, and if we go to our map, the next stage is now developed. So, there are currently 5 stages to colonization: unexplored, explored, settled, developed, and colonized. So unexplored basically means that sector is locked out and unavailable to you. You can still fly there manually, but you don't have access to the colonization system. Explored is that this sector is available to you. You can trade in that sector and take on early game contracts. Once you get to settled, the sector starts to become more active. You'll see more cargo ships going around, you'll be able to trade for more items, and you'll unlock more contracts, and you'll see more frequent random encounters. Additionally, as you expand in your colonization, more outposts will be added. You can see a new outpost has been added to Verger called Valis Reach, which is on the surface. So if I go back to my ship, go back to my map, and click on Valis Reach, and then press fast travel, you can see that there is a new fast travel cutscene that now plays, rather than your ship just appearing at your destination. Although this appears to be some sort of faster than light travel, and we're traveling towards the surface of a planet. It doesn't really matter, I just find that funny. And you can see I've been brought to the Valis Reach outpost, which if I go inside, has its own contract terminal with its own set of contracts. A couple of contracts later, and now you can see I have another station upgrade contract. So if I accept, and then if I return to the contract terminal after completing it, you can see that sector progress will change to developed, and I'll get another cutscene.
Milestone reached.
Now that we're developed, if I go to my map, you can see that another outpost has been unlocked, Palatine Station. So if I fast travel back to Velation Station, and then once I'm there, I can then fast travel again to Palatine Station, which once again has a contract terminal with a number of contracts for you to complete. And then finally, Station Upgrade Long Range Communication Facility. And then once that is completed, we should receive the final cutscene for this region. And with that complete, you can see I have now unlocked access to the Chemic sector, setting it to explored. Now the Chemic sector also has 2 additional stations, the Dustspire Junction, which is on the planet of Chemic, and also the Caligo station, which is in the orbit of Caligo, the moon of Chemic. On top of this, once you fully colonise the Chemic and Vergia sectors, it unlocks the endless colonisation mode, where the game will keep generating you more contracts to complete to get more and more rewards. Whereas in the previous update, there was only a set number of contracts to complete to basically fully unlock the sector. So this means you still have plenty to do once you've colonised these sectors. And additionally, as previously mentioned, the higher the sector's colonisation stage is, the more encounters there are, the more cargo ships there are, the more trading there is, the more advanced contracts there are, etc, etc. So colonisation feels much more worthwhile than before. And personally, I'm very happy that there's a bunch of set landmarks on the map that are fixed locations in the world, as this makes the Space Engineers universe feel more lived in than just the random encounters that are placed down everywhere. A new hazard has been added to planets, wind, specifically during sandstorms. As you can see, this little grasshopper ship is being blown away in the wind, and if I get into it, even though I'm not moving and just sitting still, you can see the ship is still slightly oscillating around, making it much more difficult to fly it. And if I go down to the debug options, you can increase the wind. Oh, isn't that fun? What if I made the wind speed like, I don't know, 10 times? Whee! Oh no. The wind is so strong, I actually can't fly in that direction. Even with my booster, I can't get that fast. Now, depending on what your vehicle is, it might not be as badly affected. You can see that my rover, whilst it's being blown around a little bit... Oh, famous last words. Maybe I should have turned the wind speed back to normal before trying that. But you can see a vehicle like a rover is less affected due to it being on the ground. And you can see a heavier ship like this one here, whilst it is still affected a little bit, is affected much less than the little grasshopper we looked at before. And if I fly inside this hangar, you can see that the effect is pretty much entirely neutralized, making things like hangars, mountains, valleys, and other large structures working as they would work in real life as a windbreak, preventing the wind from actually hitting and interacting with your ship. Again, this wind is designed to be more of a hazard than it is to be an actual feature of the game, so don't expect to be putting sails on your ships and stuff like that. It's just designed to be an engineering deterrent about flying your ship through a sandstorm. There is one more thing that wind interacts with though, wind turbines. They've been added to Space Engineers 2 in this update, and like their Space Engineers 1 counterparts, they passively generate energy from wind. However, due to the unified grid system in Space Engineers 2, they can be placed much closer together in this game. Additionally, a new feature is that wind turbines can be stacked on top of each other, so you can build big wind turbine towers like this. And as you would expect, when the sandstorms are raging and the wind is blowing very, very fast, the output of your wind turbines increases, generating you more energy. Ore distribution in this update has been slightly modified. As you can see, gold, lead and magnesium are all now possible to get on Vergia, whereas they previously were not. However, they are extremely rare on Vergia. Ore nodes are now split into 3 separate categories: surface, medium and deep, which is around 100 meters, with rarer ores and larger ore nodes being found the further down you go. So whilst gold, lead and magnesium are all found on the Earth-like planet, expect them to be much deeper underground. And additionally, I know one of the complaints about Space Engineers 2 was that the ore nodes were quite small, but now larger ore nodes are available, they're just found deeper underground. And on top of rarer ores being found deeper, the volcanic regions of Vergia also contain rare resource deposits. As you can see, I've immediately found 3 magnesium deposits over here, and over here I've found lead. So it seems like volcanic regions in Space Engineers 2 will potentially be the areas to fight over in multiplayer. When you start a new game in Space Engineers 2, you can see you have a number of new options. The survival mode now has a new tutorial, which is very different from the previous survival tutorial, as it appears to no longer have the story element, and instead just focuses on teaching you how to play the game. I think it would definitely be worth checking out at least once. There's also Quick Start Survival, which is the normal survival mode, but just skips the tutorial part. And there's also Classic Survival, which you spoke about in my last video, which is a modified version of the base Space Engineers 2 survival mode, which was previously a mod created by Keen, which has now been added to the main menu. And this makes a couple of tweaks to survival. For example, if you mine voxels, you now get a small amount of resources. So by mining sand, you get silicon. By mining dirt, you get iron. And by mining rock, you get nickel. Backpack building has been reduced down to only being able to craft the basics to build a smelter and the blocks that are required to use it. And then from there, you will have to craft the rest of your components yourself. On top of this, there's been a bunch of other changes, like recipes and ores have been adjusted, and a bunch of other tweaks to make the game a much more traditional Space Engineers 1 style survival experience. Although now Space Engineers 1 gives you a rover to start off with, so maybe this could use more adjustment. So, everything else. They've added the beginnings of a skin system to Space Engineers 2, and for players that own the Pioneer Edition, you can now switch over to the Pioneer suit. which to me looks very 40k inspired, I think. I don't know anything about 40k, but it definitely invokes that kind of aesthetic. And additionally, this suit has a solid visor, as opposed to the see-through one that the base engineer has, and I can finally stop receiving comments about how he looks like every single mustache man on Earth. On top of this, you might have already noticed that there's been a couple of animation tweaks. One of the main ones is that the engineer no longer does that weird aimless look off to the side, which means I can now zoom on his face to my heart's content. You might have noticed it already, but there's this new flight UI you can see here, which shows a bunch of details that I know players were asking for. But if you find this too intrusive, if you press U, it hides the flight UI and moves your speed back to the bottom left again, which is what I think I'll personally be doing, as I find it a bit overwhelming to have this much information at the center of the screen at once. There's a couple of new decorative blocks in this update, these two stair variants that you can see here, and these are the interior wall cutout and the inset panels. The cutout is a wall with a hole in the middle of it, and the panels are several different blocks that fit perfectly inside that gap for decoration. There have been a number of optimizations in this update, which I can definitely feel the effects of. I have a very powerful machine, so I can run Space Engineers 2 quite comfortably, but every now and again I do get little stutters, and so far those stutters appear to be completely gone in this update, and the developers have said that more optimizations like this will come in the future, but it's still worth bearing in mind that the bulk of the optimizations for Space Engineers 2 will happen towards the end of early access, as the game transitions to being an early access game to a full release. But as I said, there's been a number of optimizations in this update and also in the previous update, so it might be worth trying again if you were previously having issues. They've added a new decal system, which you saw in the scorch marks of the blocks when something explodes. This also includes bullet impacts and drill impacts, and also the tyre tracks that are left behind as you're driving. They've added new types of foliage, like these birch trees with these weird blobs on them, which I'm not quite sure what they are. They've added a bunch of new sounds to the game, particle effect randomization, they've localized the game into Russian and Ukrainian, and so much more. So if you want to see everything that's been added in this update, I will link in the description below to the full changelog once it's released. And additionally, more details about the update will be revealed during the live stream which I mentioned, which if you're watching this video on the day it comes out, will be on July 6th at 5 PM UTC, so don't forget to check that out. Additionally, I'm sure during this live stream, we'll find out more information on the next update after this one, whether that be Vertical Slice 2.4, which I imagine will tweak a bunch of features that are added in this update, or the next major update we know we're getting, Vertical Slice 4, the NPC and multiplayer update, which we'll be releasing later this year. If you're interested in the future of Space Engineers 2 and want to keep up to date with the game, the best place to do it is here, so don't forget to like this video and subscribe to this channel to keep up to date. And if you want to go the extra mile and support this channel, you can do so by becoming a YouTube member or a patron with the links in the description below.